UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government has been accused of blackmailing opponents by one of its own MPs. William Wragg, who also sits on a parliamentary committee, says MPs who have called for a confidence vote in Boris Johnson's leadership have faced intimidation and threats. His comments add to the already heightened speculation over Johnson's future that have been sparked by allegations of lockdown breaching parties in Downing Street during nationwide COVID restrictions. For more on this, let's go to London now, where our reporter Tyke Enright is waiting for us. Good evening, Tyke. So today was to be the day of the calm after yesterday's storm of PMQs. But so far, we've seen the government being accused of blackmailing MPs and reports that Sue Gray has found damning evidence. Can this go on for much longer?
Hi, Stefan. Well, listen, plenty are convinced here that Boris Johnson is on a one-way street out of office, but he is certainly moving slowly and trying his best to cling on. You're right, this was a day which began feeling like Boris Johnson had dodged a bullet. That reported move against him by some of his MPs yesterday didn't actually materialise. But then two other MPs fired a new bullet, as you mentioned there, William Wragg, suggesting that he and other rebels within the Conservative Party have been blackmailed into rowing in behind Boris Johnson. And the MP who sensationally quit the party yesterday, on Wednesday I should say, for the Labour Party, also said that he too had been blackmailed in the past, convinced to vote in a particular way, perhaps on unpopular legislation, on the threat that funding for a new school in his constituency would be cut off if he didn't. Now, supporters of the Prime Minister are pointing out that William Wragg is a long-time critic of Boris Johnson. He was one of the first to call for him to resign after the recent scandal about parties in Downing Street. And of course, the other is the MP who quit the party sensationally. They're suggesting that these allegations are politically motivated. You asked the question, can this go on for much longer? Well, what it feels like now is that many Conservative MPs are giving Boris Johnson the breathing space which he's asked for to allow Sue Gray, that senior civil servant who's investigating all these lockdown parties in Downing Street, the time to complete her report. We don't know exactly when she's going to do that. Could it be next week? Could it be the following week? And indeed, we don't know exactly whether or not she's going to, clear Boris Johnson of responsibility or even go as far as blaming him. But I think if there is still an appetite among his MPs to move against him, the publication of that report will be the most likely time for that to happen.
I mean, let's face it, we have Britain in the middle of an energy crisis, a cost of living crisis, and we have a Prime Minister who is basically dealing with questions over his own integrity and behavior, right? Your thoughts?
Well, that is always the conundrum when a leader is caught up in a scandal. It happens in other countries too, of course. It becomes a distraction from the business of doing government. Worth pointing out as well, they're also trying to steer their way out of a pandemic here, just like they are in most other countries around the world. But actually, they are getting on with that business, and indeed trying, as some cynics would say, to distract us from the scandal by abruptly lifting several of the latest COVID restrictions, the Omicron COVID restrictions, which have applied in England. For example, working from home is no longer recommended here in England. Cynics have questioned whether the timing of all this is political. Of course, it is happening in other jurisdictions too, but in part it's worked in terms of distraction tactic. Right-wing newspapers and commentators who had been criticising the Prime Minister are now celebrating the end of these restrictions. But I don't think Boris Johnson can relax just yet. It's worth restating there are people on the inside in Downing Street who are actively campaigning and briefing against him, who are leaking against him. That's why we've seen so many damaging revelations in recent weeks, and there could yet be more revelations to come.